Welcome to another exciting Marten Cordial adventure through time and space. I want to warn y'all that this episode's gonna be bad. It's gonna suck. Don't expect anything of it. So now that expectations have been lowered, anything that we accomplish in this stream will be an exciting, unexpected bonus. And I believe that that's the only way to approach any creative endeavor, is with zero expectations, so that everything is a plus. So Marten Cordial, if you're not aware, is a show where we improvise a short story on the spot. We make something up, and we write about it, and we try to make something that makes sense, or at least is fun to read, or at least is fun to write. So far, this is our 10th episode. This is episode X. Prior episodes have written these stories: River of Chocolate Dreams, the exciting cosmic space ventures of Jackson Space Boots. Jackson is a fan favorite, I think. Gastrol, Cold Blood. We've got all these lovely stories that you can read in the other episodes. We might do like an omnibus, like just like a reading of those things at some point, so they're accessible. But anyway, let's write a story. Welcome Project 70 to the chat. Thanks for joining in. Let's start. I've got nothing, which is the best way to start. But I've got a name. Herbert Paddleman. I'm thinking like a fella who paddles up a boat for a living. I'm thinking like a pole boat sort of a situation, like a ferryman, like someone who, takes people across the Styx, the River of the Dead in Hades. That's good. It's a bit dark, though. Let's start with something more, like, domestic, I think. Herbert Paddleman is obviously a joke name, I think, which may or may not be a good thing. I think we tend towards having, like, the silly, goofy, Discworld sort of names a lot of the time on Marten Cordial. Maybe we should try and have something a little more grounded, at least to start with. So, like, what's like, I like Paddleman, if he's a Paddleman. So, we could just call him, Joan Paddleman. I don't think Joan's a name, but we can make it one. Let's zoom in a little. Let's get comfy. All right. Herbert Paddleman, surveyed the docks. The trick was to judge judge prospective customers for how much they might pay. We'll find a better way to say that. Was to judge prospective customers for how much they'd pay for his service. A sun-weary peasant might only afford a small fare, but a fat wealthy merchant could be convinced to pay thrice the price. Oh, all right. We seem to be veering into sort of a medieval setting, if only from the word thrice. But I think the idea is that this man Herbert he's like a medieval Uber driver. He gives boat rides for hire, and he's trying to get the best fare out of his customers. And we want to give a bit of the flavor of what this place is where he works. Herbert Paddleman surveyed the docks. The trick was to... It was early in the morning. All right, let's give it some, like, context of where this place is. It was early in the morning on the first day of the feast of Saint... What's a good name for a saint? Saint... Saint Agnes of the Broken Sandal. I like that. I mean, it's a bit awkward saying Feast of Saint Agnes of the Broken Sandal, but whatever. It was early in the morning on the first... Alright, that's a really ugly sentence, though. It was the first day of the Feast of Saint Agnes of the Broken Sandal, and the sun... Alright, let's say it was the second day. It was the second day of the Feast of Saint Agnes of the Broken Sandal, and the sun rose unsteadily, as though it too had partaken in the revelry last night. The opening, the first day of the feast. The first day of the feast was always a. I want to do something with like the word memorable. Like you can say that a night is memorable, as in everyone had like a great party, but also it might be like you might not remember a great party. I feel like you can make a joke with the word memorable. The first day of the feast was always a memorable affair for those who did not over-imbibe. How do you spell imbibe? Many would be sleeping in. Oh, we should probably tweet, shouldn't we? Let's check out a tweet for the tweet people. Oh, we should. That was that. Tweet. Cordial. Alright, cool. Herbert Paddleman surveyed the docks. The trick was to judge prospective customers for how much they'd pay for his service. A sun-weary peasant might only afford a small fare, but a fat, wealthy merchant could be convinced to pay. Wealthy merchant might pay thrice the price. With enough good fares. With enough good fares in the morning, Herbert could, with luck, Herbert could earn enough to get home before the sun. With luck, Herbert could earn enough to get home before the sun went down. So I guess there's a few ways we could sort of play this character. Like we could make Herbert like a bit of like a grifter and a schemer and someone who's exploiting people, or we could play Herbert as someone who is like down on his luck himself and is just sort of struggling to survive. We could play him either way. Haven't decided. It was the second day of the Feast of Saint Agnes of the Broken Sandal. It would flow better if we took out the of the Broken Sandal. The sentence would flow better, but it gives it a lot of flavor to say what Saint Agnes is a saint of. And the sun rose unsteadily, as though it too had partaken in the revelry last night. The first day of the feast was always a memorable affair for those who did not over-imbibe. Many would be sleeping in late, but many more had work to do. I think we're almost like exploring like social inequality in this one, because we've just sort of inherently made this like class distinction, and I'm not sure where like Herbert is gonna stand. Welcome Rega, and welcome Akonig to the chat. Akonig describes Marten as the famed master in the arts of literature and limericks. We haven't done many limericks, but like I'm sure I'm sure we got it through limericks up a sleeve. I'm sure we'll bust out a hot haiku at some point. Maybe we'll do a whole story in verse or something, as though he was Homer. That would be fun. It was the second day of the feast of St. Agnes, and the sun rose unsteadily, as though it too had partaken in the revelry last night. The first day of the feast was always a memorable affair. Well, the first night. The first night of the feast was always a memorable affair for those who did not over-imbibe. Many would be sleeping in late, but many more had work to do. Herbert saw the farmers. Herbert saw the farmers transporting. Herbert saw the farmers transporting heaps of produce to the market. Great piles of radishes, cabbages, double-ended carrots, boats so overloaded. Is overloaded a word? I feel like it should be. Boats so heavy with produce. Great piles of radishes, cabbages, double-ended carrots, boats so weighing down the boats to the point. Weighing down the boats so that the river water almost kissed the top of the boat. I think we're suffering from a lack of nautical knowledge here. I'm sure like there are different kinds of boats. I don't think boat is a very descriptive word for this. I mean, a pole boat is, I think I'm imagining what Herbert Paddleman has, but I don't even know if that's quite the right term. I'm imagining quite a small boat, almost like a gondola. Is a gondola a pole boat? We need more boat knowledge up in here. Welcome, Fabian and 70. All right. Herbert's vessel wasn't large enough to carry the farmer's wares. He hoped one day to buy a great He hoped one day to buy a larger ship for himself to carry whole groups of farmers, along with farmers, including their goats and all. Except no, I think Herbert has to have a bigger dream. Like this is where we really need to like have a reason to care about the character. He needs to want something, and I think maybe he should want something more than like carrying farmers around. He hoped one day to buy a larger ship for himself and head upriver to the capital. Where he could take noble folk on pleasure cruises across the about the Pearl Bay. Yeah, I don't know about this. But that's a good enough dream, I think. Herbert wants to. Well, does Herbert? Well, Herbert wants a bigger boat. I mean, like the obvious sort of thing for a boatman to sort of want would be, go sailing off into the sunset on their fancy big boat, I think. But maybe Herbert is a more grounded person, and maybe Herbert will find like some kind of more fancy dream later on, or maybe Herbert will take a sort of a left turn. I don't know. 70 says, surely a bay would be downriver, not upriver. And that is an extremely good point. That is an extremely good point. Yes, I suppose a bay would be downriver. I mean, upriver I like because it, implies going up. It implies, moving up in the world. But, we kind of a lake there. So, or a bay. Well, let's make it a lake. Let's make it a lake, because a lake would be downriver, or could be downriver, I would think. So let's do that. Or we could take noble folk on pleasure cruises about the Pearly Bay. Is Pearly Bay a good name? Pearlescent, silver, lake. We're saying lake, aren't we? But I don't know, is that something you would want? Would you want to, like, take, like, rich assholes on cruises in a lake? Like, would that be fun? Alright, here we are. Alright, so what if, like, Herbert, like, grew up by the lake? And so the lake, like, means something to him, and so he wants to, like... Yeah, okay, so... Herbert had grown up... Herbert What? That's a... Herbert grew up by the Pearly Lake. Oh, here's the plot. Alright, here's a plot. So Herbert takes person 1 for a ride, and they seem like mysterious and suspicious. And then person 2 comes for a ride and asks about person 1, or at least that person like seems to be like chasing down or is interested in finding person 1. And so then Herbert has this situation of like, oh shit, do I give away what person 1 was up to? Like, should I help person 2 find person 1, or like should I not help? And I think Herbert has to sort of inextricably be drawn into whatever drama is happening between those two people. Although, I mean, I'm not sure how Herbert's like boat skills. Well, all right, that'll be what like the call to adventure is. Like Herbert will have to sail a larger boat off to a distant island to find something for these mysterious people. And that'll be his sort of crossing into a world of adventure, which connects to his nautical interests, I hope. Let's do that. So, all right, what have we got? Herbert Paddleman surveyed the docks. The trick was to judge prospective customers for how much they'd pay for his service. A sun-weary peasant might only afford a small fare, but a fat, wealthy merchant might pay thrice the price. With luck, Herbert could earn enough to get home before the sun went down. It was the second day of the Feast of St. Agnes, and the sun rose unsteadily, as though it too had partaken in the revelry last night. The first night of the feast was always a memorable affair, for those who did not over-imbibe. Many would be sleeping in late, but many more had work to do. Herbert saw farmers transporting heaps of produce to the market, great piles of radishes, cabbages, and double-ended carrots, weighing down their barges so that the river water kissed the top of the boat. What top? Like what's like the rim or like the edge of the top of a boat? That's ugh. Herbert's vessel wasn't large enough to carry the farmer's ware. Yeah. All right, let's get rid of the Pearly Lake stuff for now. Kiss the top of the boat. Let's describe this town so we've got sort of a sense of bearings. The purple dawn painted... That's such a cliche. The purple dawn painted the terracotta rooftops of the terracotta rooftops of the town. The chimneys of the bakeries and the bakeries and blacksmiths. We're really going like full medieval, aren't we? I'd like to sort of like, I think it's kind of boring to use like the generic like medieval fantasy sort of like space. Like I'd like to put some sort of like twist or some kind of flavor to it. We'll try and find places to sort of change that. The chimneys of the bakeries and blacksmiths were already sending gentle trails of labor skywards. Oh god, that got a bit poetic. Cockerels crowed the dawn. The chimneys of the bakeries and blacksmiths were already sending gentle trails. I mean, labor as in like, we're already sending. Well, we're already smoking with industry. We're already gently smoking. I think it's a peaceful. It's a peaceful place. Like this is where the adventure starts from. It's got to be like a normal, peaceful, positive enough place, but there's got to be a problem. And I think probably the problem for Herbert is that he's a bit bored with his job, or he wants, or he's like stressed because he's like looking out for all the wares. He's overworked or something, or he's not getting paid enough, or he's got some sort of. I think it's specifically his paddling that he takes issue with. The chimneys of the bakeries and blacksmiths were already gently smoking. Church bells. All right, here's an excuse to. I mean, let's not say church. Let's say temple. Ooh, that's so different. Yeah. All right. Well, we'll work on it. Temple bells. Temple bells. Rang for morning prayer. Well, yeah, I mean, are people, like, sleeping through the morning... are temple bells... Like, we've already established that people are, like, hungover from all the drinking. And on a religious holiday, I'll note. And now these temple bells are ringing for prayer. And people are going to sleep through the prayer unless they're, like... So what kind of society is this? Is this, like, a super strict religious society? Or is this a more, like, a relaxed sort of society? Temple bells rang for the morning prayer... Morning prayer, at least for those who heard it. So maybe we're making a distinction between like people who are into the faith and people who aren't. Maybe there's some kind of conflict or tension there. I don't think Herbert would be. Well, maybe Herbert would be a religious man. All right, the chimneys of the bakeries and blacksmiths were already. All right, Matthew Tyler has like a way better line. The chimneys of the bakeries and blacksmiths, the smoky tendrils of morning industry, Matthew Tyler says. I think that's better. How do we phrase that? Smoky... all right, we'll get back to it. We're already... Temple bells rang for the morning prayer. Fuck, alright, whatever. Let's skip that. Description's hard. I feel like what we've got now is just way too much of like a generic medieval town sort of feel, but I don't know. We'll get there. Herbert saw a figure hurry. Alright, here we are. Herbert saw a likely customer. An older gentleman in fine velvets. An older gentleman wearing fine velvets. Wearing fine velvets and silver. An older gentleman wearing fine velvets and silver. Walking with the unsteady gait of one who Walking with the unsteady gait of one who, like, hasn't recovered from drinking the previous night. What's a quick way to say that? Walking with an unsteady gait. Herbert saw a likely customer, an older gentleman wearing fine velvets and silver, walking with an unsteady gait towards the river. We haven't really established, like, the river being a thing, have we? The purple dawn painted the terracotta rooftops of the town, and danced. Man, this feels so cliche. And danced on the gently. Well, I mean, how do you describe, like, the undulation and the just sort of motion of the top of the river? Just like sort of a, and danced on the surface of the river. Dancing with the wind, just moving with the wind. Danced on the surface of the river. And danced on the river like ink. I mean, it doesn't look like ink when light's on a river. And danced on the river like a mirror. Painted the terracotta rooftops of the town and yeah, something river. Welcome, Jim. Welcome, Advar, and happy birthday, Albert. Temple bells rang for morning prayer. Herbert saw a likely customer, an older gentleman wearing fine velvets and silver, walking with an unsteady gait towards the river. Herbert took up his pole to intercept the man when a voice startled him. How much for passage, Poleman? Do you think paddleman could be like the canonical word for this man's job? Like maybe they call these like ferryman paddleman or ferryman. Oh, let's just say ferryman, because like poleman as in like pole boat could work, but let's say ferryman. How much for passage, ferryman? Welcome, Carter. How much for passage, ferryman? Herbert turned and saw an urchin girl of uncertain look. Like maybe she looks foreign. And saw an urchin girl. Wrapped in frayed, what's like that fabric that's, urchin girl wearing a frayed Herbert turned and saw an urchin girl wearing an old tunic and saw an urchin girl. Her mess of black her tangle and saw an urchin girl. Tangle of black locks, a tangle of black locks, a tangle of black locks from Herbert turned and saw an urchin girl. hooded and because I think this person is like fleeing something, or she's got some secret, or she's running away or something, and she's going to be pursued by someone else. Yeah, shawl. I think shawl is good. Yeah, it's or an urchin girl. A tangle of black locks spilled from a frayed shawl. Yeah, shawl is good. 70. How old is the girl? Good question. Teenage, I suppose. She's got to be like, she's got to be capable enough to like run away. Or she could be a young woman, or she could be old. Maybe she could be old. Maybe like the object of pursuit could be an old woman for once, or hell, even a man. I think it's more fun if it's a younger person. Herbert turned and saw an urchin girl. A tangle of black lob spilled from a frayed shawl. Herbert was about to tell her she couldn't afford passage. He's not very sympathetic, is he? Herbert was about to tell her she couldn't afford passage when the girl produced a handful of silver. Where'd you get that? Herbert asked suspiciously. Where'd you get that? Herbert asked doubtfully. You want it or not? The girl asked, and threw a glance over her shoulder. The girl was obviously trouble. And Herbert didn't want to make that trouble his own. His grandma always told him, to let trouble lie. That's not very helpful advice, is it? We'll think of some better advice for his grandma to give him. Advar says, doesn't urchin refer to a kid? Yeah, I suppose it does, doesn't it? Well, but I mean, what does a grown-up urchin be called? I mean, you can have like a homeless street person who's older. Yeah, alright, so apparently urchin means like young child. So I suppose that doesn't fit like a teenage or young adult person. So how best to describe this sort of like ragged street person? Which isn't necessarily even what she is. A Koenig says, is the girl dead? Is Herbert like this Greek ferryman? Yeah, I think we've definitely got some sort of like Styxian Hades underworld sort of flavor. I like that. And yeah, maybe the twist later on can be that the girl is dead. I mean, maybe the person who's pursuing the girl is like some kind of priestess or priest who's like trying to get the dead to stay dead. You know, maybe the trouble that's happening lately is that dead people are coming back to life. And the faith think that the dead should stay dead, but other people think that the dead shouldn't stay dead, and Herbert gets caught up in that conflict. I think that would be cool. But I suppose if she's dead, there should be something like physically weird about her. Like maybe there's something in her eyes, or like maybe she's just got really bad breath. Maybe she smells of formaldehyde. I mean, let's just. Making her pale makes sense. At least. Or she should be a bit sort of skinny and withered, maybe. But I mean, I don't think we don't want zombie people. We don't need medieval zombies. That's been done. The girl was obviously trouble, and Herbert didn't want to make that trouble his own. His grandma always told him to let trouble. Always told him not to buy another's trouble. His grandma always told him, yeah. To let trouble lie. Yeah, I think that's fine. His grammar always told him to let trouble lie. But with that silver... But that's silver. That was a week's fare, at least. The girl didn't know how much... The girl didn't know how much she had. So Herbert is kind of a dick. Like, Herbert is very self-interested, I think. And maybe the lesson that Herbert's going to learn throughout this story is that he needs to, like, actually sympathize with people instead of exploiting them. And I think what maybe makes Herbert, like, semi-relatable or sympathetic is that, like, maybe Herbert himself is in, like a shitty situation. But yeah, so I think we do need to go back and sort of add this sort of sympathetic background for Herbert so he's not a total dick. But now Herbert's just, like, gonna take the money for the girl even though she's overpaying. The girl didn't know how much she had. He'd be a fool not to take it. The irony being that, you know, Herbert is probably foolishly blundering into an adventure that he never bargained for. He'd be a fool not to take it. You just need the other. You just need. You just want to get to West Bank? Herbert asked. Yes, she said. Yes, she said, with an urgent... Yes, she said, with urgency. Yes, she said, with urgency. Now, or not at all. So the girl's not, like, totally, she sort of knows what she's doing to some extent. Like, maybe the girl actually understands the value of the money, but she doesn't need the value of the money, except she just literally needs to cross this river. Maybe Herbert will, like, refuse her or, like, fail to get her across, and then the girl will get captured. And then the next person to come to Herbert is someone who's actually, like, trying to care for the girl or something, and then Herbert gets roped into a mission to, like, free the girl or something. Like, maybe the girl gets, like, arrested, and then Herbert ends up trying to help her to, like, sort of right his wrong by not giving her passage or something. Or maybe Herbert could, like, take her silver and leave her there anyway or something. Like, if he sees that guards are coming and chasing her or something. Maybe this will be about Herbert trying to redeem failure or something. Let's see what we got so far. Herbert Paddleman surveyed the docks. The trick was to judge prospective customers for how much they'd pay. Yeah, well, we don't need for his service. The trick was to judge prospective customers for how much they'd pay. A sun-weary peasant might only afford a small fare, but a fat, wealthy merchant... A sun-weary peasant could only afford a small fare, but a fat, wealthy merchant might pay thrice the price. With luck, Herbert could earn enough to get home before the sun went down. I suppose the way a free market works is that if someone... if some paddleman could just undercut Herbert's price. If Herbert is demanding a triple price from a wealthy merchant, some other paddleman could offer double price and get the job instead. But you know, maybe this medieval town is not quite that capitalistic or whatever, I don't know. It was the second day of the feast of St. Agnes, and the sun rose unsteadily, as though it too had partaken in the revelry last night. The first night of the feast was always a memorable affair for those who did not over-imbibe. Many would be sleeping in late, but many more had work to do. Herbert saw farmers transporting heaps of produce to the market. Great piles of radishes, cabbages, and double-ended carrots, weighing down their river barges so the water kissed the top of the boat. The purple dawn painted the terracotta rooftops of the town, and danced atop the river. Still lame, but it'll do. The chimneys of the bakeries and blacksmiths were already gently smoking. Temple bells rang for the morning prayer. For those who were awake, for those who would hear it. Because it's not about... So it's not just about, being unconscious and dumb to the sound of the church bells. It's choosing not to hear the church bells. That makes it a more, significant... choice, whether to engage with the religion or not to. I think that's more interesting than just being so drunk that you don't hear it. Advar says that you're not meant to end a sentence with a preposition. I never learned what a preposition was. Let's look that up. Preposition. A preposition is a word such as after, into, on, and with. Where did we do that? How much it? Yeah, I still don't know what prepositions are. Herbert saw a likely customer, an older gentleman wearing fine velvets and silver, walking with an unsteady gait. I already said silver. An older gentleman wearing fine velvets, walking with an unsteady gait towards the river. Herbert took up his pole to intercept the man when a voice startled him. "How much for passage, ferryman?" Herbert turned and saw an urchin girl. A tangle of black locks spilled from beneath a frayed shawl. Herbert was about to tell her she couldn't afford passage when the girl produced a handful of silver. "Where'd you get that?" Herbert asked doubtfully. "You want it or not?" the girl asked, and threw a glance over her shoulder. The girl was obviously trouble, and Herbert didn't want to make that trouble his own. But that silver, that was a week's fare at least. The girl didn't know how much she had. He'd be a fool not to take it. "You just want to get to West Bank?" Herbert asked. "Yes," she said. "Now or not at all?" Her eyes flashed. Her eyes flashed with determination. I want to give her a sort of a steely, sort of defiant, sort of like she sort of knows what she's about to some extent. Like she's not. All right. Welcome, Hadass, to the stream. She asks what we missed. What we've got is a fella called Herbert Paddleman, and he's a ferryman on a river in some sort of medieval town sort of place, and he takes people across the river for money, and he's been approached by this girl who wants passage, and she's got this big handful of silver, and it looks like she's running away from something, and Herbert's not sure if he wants to get involved. Her eyes flashed steely. Is that a stupid sentence? Maybe it is. Her eyes flashed steely. I could find another ferryman. "I'll take you," Herbert said. "I'll take you," Herbert said, and pushed his boat by the dock. Quickly. He didn't want to be seen with the girl any more than the girl wanted to be seen. So we need some sort of like antagonistic force that's like after the girl, I think. And if we want to make this interesting, I think having the temple, having the church being like the sort of antagonists who are trying to find the girl, I think that's more interesting than just having like, you know, the town guard or whatever. So let's have like temple guards, and that, you know, they can have some sort of ideology, and I think, you know, what'll be interesting is if those like religious zealots turn out to like be right. Like maybe it is a bad thing if, you know, it is the case that the dead are rising or something. Maybe there's something about this river, maybe there's something in the river. Actually, here's a thing. What if Herbert thinks that the girl is just being taken across the river to the other side? What if the girl actually just wants to get, like, to the middle of the river so that she can then just jump into the water because she's some sort of magic water person or something? Like, maybe there's something in the river that the girl needs and that the temple people are trying to stop her from getting. Maybe the girl isn't trying to escape. She's just... Although, of course, you know, couldn't she just swim? I don't know. Maybe the girl can't swim. Maybe she's... I don't know. Any more than the girl wanted to be seen. Herbert glimpsed the... Alright, what color should the robes of the religious people be? Or maybe they should wear something more interesting than robes. Like maybe they should have like scales, or like what if they wore turtle shells? I mean, if these are like river people, maybe they could wear giant deadly tortoises in the river, Hadas says. Temple guards with 3-headed dogs are going to exist. Is it... I would like it if the temple guards wore tortoise shells, and it would be hilarious because, like, if these guards are trying to chase down the girl or whatever, they're wearing these giant turtle shells, which is going to make it a lot harder for them to run. But maybe the turtle shells have, you know, some actual purpose as well. Or maybe they have like small turtle shells, like they've got little like necklaces with turtle shells on them, and like rings with turtle shells on them. Or, you know, like crab shells and stuff as well. I mean, you know, we could get a bit Lovecraftian with it and have this be some sort of really salty affair. Right, but what's the ideology of this church, of these temple people? I mean, I think that I like the idea of like the girl is dead, like she's somehow an undead person, and which ties into the like Styx sort of imagery. So I think if we're doing that, we need to make the river a bit ominous. Like maybe the river sort of smokes a little bit, or it's, you know, black or something, and it's got a bit of a dark sort of theme to it, and maybe that's why the girl wants to... Oh, here's the thing. Dead people can't cross water, right? Isn't that a thing in like lore, in like mythology, that like the dead and zombies can't cross running water? That's a thing in like Sabri Illyria Leporsen, at least, which is a really cool book series. So maybe the only way that the girl can cross the river is with Herbert's ferry. So maybe he'll learn that from the temple guards after they find him. Herbert glimpsed, or maybe he hears. Herbert glimpsed a couple of temple guards moving purposefully across. Herbert glimpsed a couple of temple guards moving purposefully in their direction. Not in their direction. Herbert glimpsed a couple of temple guards moving purposefully across the docks. The turtle shell necklaces. What? I mean, how do we describe the sound of like turtle shell necklaces? I mean, they wouldn't clink. They'd have... I mean, it would sort of sound a bit like tapping or jangling or clattering. The turtle shell necklaces And I guess the imagery of like a turtle shell. I mean, a turtle shell is like a defensive sort of symbol, and I think these temple guards, this religion is like a conservative one that's trying to sort of like keep the natural order. They're trying to defend the natural order insofar as dead people staying dead and whatever. The turtle shell necklaces. How do you describe like the movement of the shells just like moving across the necklace? I don't know. Herbert glimpsed a couple of temple guards moving purposefully across the docks. Their turtle shell necklaces caught the morning light. The turtle shell necklaces caught the morning light, and their dark robes, flowed like shadows. Ooh. Hadass says that thumping is a good word for the turtle shells. I'm imagining like small turtle shells at this point, like on necklaces, like a whole string of like a dozen turtle shells on a necklace. I don't think they'd thump, would they? I mean, they're how heavy are turtle shells? I imagine they'd be quite uncomfortable to wear. Koenig says that turtle shells aren't very reflective. Yeah, well, I think they do actually have like a sort of a shininess, or maybe that's just how they're treated. Oh, look, well, I mean, we could have these be special turtles, of course. Like they could be special pearlescent turtle shells. Maybe they're opal turtle shells. Maybe they're bejeweled, bedazzled turtle shells. That would be fun. Or painted. What if they're painted turtle shells? Like as part of their religion, they paint their turtle shells. Clattering, chiming, lots of good suggestions. The turtle shell necklaces. Yeah, I think clattering's probably. I don't know. I don't. The turtle shell necklaces. Clinking. Whatever. The turtle shell necklaces caught the morning light, and the dark robes flowed like shadows. It was now or never. Like shadows. The girl hopped. The girl stepped carefully onto the boat. If we are making the girl like undead, like maybe she's like physically a bit unsteady, as I suppose you would be if you'd just been raised from the dead. Like maybe this girl is a bit sort of, bone creaky and a bit slow. Does she breathe? Let's say that she doesn't breathe. Like, let's say maybe that's how you identify the undead in this story. And maybe later on, the undead who are trying to hide, they learn to simulate breathing, like they pretend to breathe. But maybe this girl is, one of the first to be risen and she hasn't sort of worked that out yet. The girl stepped carefully onto the boat. It didn't seem she had been in, perhaps she hadn't been in one before. Perhaps she hadn't been in one before. Herbert thought he'd seen every sort of person. Herbert thought he'd seen every sort of person who came through this town. But he couldn't place this girl. Her clothes looked like they'd, been rotting in a crypt for 1,000 years, like maybe they actually have. Rattle! I think that's it, Edvard. Rattle. The turtle shell necklace rattled. The turtle shell necklaces, Herbert glimpsed a couple of temple guards moving purposefully across the docks. He heard their turtle shell necklaces rattling. He heard their turtle shell necklaces rattling. Their dark robes flowed like shadows. and their burrows were and their eyebrows were furrowed. I don't know. The girl stepped carefully onto the boat. Perhaps she hadn't been in one before. The girl stepped carefully onto the boat. Unsteady. Perhaps she hadn't been in one before. Perhaps she hadn't been on the river before. Herbert thought he'd seen every sort of person who came through this town, but he didn't place this girl. Her clothes looked ancient. He swore he could see cobwebs hanging off her tunic. She had an old, stale smell to her. And she wouldn't meet his eyes. But for a full bag of silver, she could smell however she liked. Herbert pushed off from dock. Herbert pushed off from dock and headed west, hoping the temple guards weren't looking for him. So temple guards is like an awkward term. We don't want to have to say temple guards too many times over. I mean, the obvious sort of contraction would be Templars, but that's got a whole other set of connotations, doesn't it? So, I mean, you know, what's a better name for these? I mean, if they're turtle themed, you know, we could call them shells, or we could call them rivers. We could call them, I don't know, what should we call these priesty types? The zealots, the guards, the robes, the priests, the bearded beardies, I mean, are they all men? They're probably men and women in the temple. I don't know, we'll decide later. Guards weren't looking for him. Monks, yeah, monks is good. Herbert had crossed this river so many times. Herbert had crossed this river so many times that his body many times that poling across was automatic. Herbert had crossed this river so many times that poling across was automatic. Sometimes to keep himself entertained, he would guess how many pushes. He would guess how many strokes it would take, how many poles it would push. Man, it sounds a bit euphemistic at this point. Sometimes to keep himself entertained, he would guess how many pushes it would take to pole his boat to shore. Carrying several heavy people might take 200. I mean, what's the right what's the right pole boat terminology? I don't know. Well, how do you describe like the pushes or strokes required? Pushes. This skinny girl should only take 120. He did the math in his head to distract himself from the trouble he might be getting himself in. He glanced back. Wait, customer is the wrong word. These like medieval people wouldn't use the word customer. What's the word that you'd use for the person who's being carried in the pole boat? She's the. He glanced back. He glanced back at the girl. She didn't seem interested in conversation. She stared out at the western bank as though it might disappear if she blinked. In fact, Herbert was quite sure he hadn't seen her blink at all. Herbert had crossed the river so many times that poling across was automatic. Sometimes, to keep himself entertained, he would guess how many pushes it would take to pole his boat to shore. Carrying several heavy people might take 200 pushes. This skinny girl should only take 120. He did the math in his head to distract himself from the trouble he was getting himself in. He glanced back at the girl. She didn't seem interested in conversation. She stared out at the western bank as though it... Yeah, passenger. Yeah, no, that's right, guys. He glanced back at his passenger. Passenger. She didn't seem interested in conversation. She stared out at the western bank as though it might disappear if she blinked. In fact, Herbert was quite sure he hadn't seen her blink at all. Best not to think about it. Soon enough, he'd reached the far bank. 110. He wasn't far off. The girl hopped off the boat. The girl hopped off the boat as soon. The girl hopped off the boat before it had even hit land. The girl hopped off the boat, hit land. I mean, we need to describe the environment on the other side of the bank. The girl hopped off the boat before it had stopped moving. The girl hopped off the boat before it had even stopped. And almost tripped into the... And almost fell into the... And almost fell into the... And almost fell into the silty mud below. And almost fell into the silty mud below the wooden... what's the right word for just like I guess it's a dock, but it's like just like a smaller, just like wooden structure that's like where the boats meet. And almost fell into the silty mud. And almost fell into the silty mud. This side of the river... This side of the river led to the... This side of the river led to the western road, where... Out into the farmlands. This side of the river led to the western road, out into the farmlands, where 1,000 peasants... Where a tiny 1,000 homesteads worked their fields. But the girl looked more... The girl looked down... But the girl looked down... But the girl looked southwards. But the girl looked southwards, into the woods. I mean, is there going to be like a big forest right next to a sort of big-ish town? I mean, they're going to be cutting some of those trees down, aren't they? Maybe we can have some sort of like, I mean, did medieval people have like park reservations? I suppose not, but maybe this can be some sort of like special protected forest. Maybe it's even like protected by the religion, by like the priests of the temple or something. I'd like there to be something sort of special or significant about these woods, this forest where this girl seems to be headed. Pier. Yeah, I think pier is the word I was thinking at us. Pier. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's definitely it. The girl hopped off the boat before it even stopped and almost fell into the silty mud. Mud under the pier. This side of the river... This side of the river... This side of the river was... This side of the river had only a few small... This side of the river had only a few small boat sheds. This side of the river had only a few small boat sheds and sparse gnarled trees either side of the western road. Beyond lay the farmlands, where 1,000 tiny homesteads worked their fields. But the girl looked southwest to the... But the girl looked southwest to the... But the girl looked southwest to the woods, where ancient fir trees... Where ancient fir trees stood... Where ancient fir trees stood in misty groves. Why does that... Alright, I feel like this is so cliche. We need more like flavor to what's going on. But the girl looked southwest to the woods, where ancient fir trees stood in misty groves. The temple men... That's a good word. Temple men. Let's go with that for now. The temple men forbade... The temple men forbade entry to these woods, except by certain persons on certain times. The temple men forbade entry to these woods. The temple men forbade entry to these woods. Maybe this foreign girl didn't know. Project 70 says that there would be like forests who are owned for nobles to have hunts in. Yeah, I suppose there would be. And yeah, I guess we haven't talked about like the government or like the nobility or whatever here. I think it might be more interesting. Like we might be going for more of a what's the term, like theocratic sort of society. Like maybe it's more the temple that's sort of running things around here. More so than like a king or like a lord or something. The temple men forbade entry to these woods. Maybe the foreign girl didn't know that. And maybe, you know, what Herbert's doing here is like he warns the girl about the prohibition about the forest to sort of make him feel better about his own guilt for having taken this ridiculous amount of money from this girl in the first place. The templemen forbade entry to these woods. Maybe this foreign girl didn't know it. I don't know. The templemen forbade entry to these woods, except... The templemen forbade entry to these woods, except for their own chosen... Except for their own chosen at their own chosen times. I don't know. Except for their own chosen at their own chosen times. Herbert supposed he should warn this foreign girl, but first he needed his silver. But first he needed her silver. Do you think that maybe a ferryman like Herbert would require payment up front, or half payment or something? I don't know. That's probably not how they do it. Herbert supposed he should warn this foreign girl. Warn this foreign girl of the prohibition. I think part of like what this story needs is more sort of like, I mean, it needs more like specific descriptions of things, like the sort of like turtle shell necklaces are a start. But I think it also needs like more names and sort of like proper nouns and more sort of like words that make you go ooh, like you know, maybe this prohibition needs some special name, like, you know, the order of the tree people or whatever the fuck, like something that gives it something a bit sort of mystical and tangible to sort of grab, ooh, that's a thing. Because I think most of the story is like, you know, even just like the word choices are mostly just sort of, you know, we're talking about docks and blacksmiths and peasants and merchants, and like all of those words are like very sort of obvious vocabulary for this kind of story. And I think, you know, fir trees and stuff gives it something a little bit more specific, and sort of like, you know, silty mud, and you know, that's sort of almost something, but I think it needs something more unusual and flavorful. So maybe we'll try and add that another time. I think we're going to wrap this up shortly. So let's finish up this transaction with Herbert and the girl first. Herbert supposed he should warn this foreign girl of the prohibition, but first he needed his silver. She handed his payment. She handed his payment. What's a way of saying that she has like little interest in the payment? Like she's not too worried about like how much she's giving away. She handed his payment. She handed his payment quickly. She handed his payment without a second thought. And Herbert felt the weight of silver with satisfaction. And Herbert felt the weight of silver with satisfaction. She turned to leave. She turned to leave, not by the west road, but towards the southern forest. She turned to leave, not by the west road, but towards the southern forest. Herbert hesitated. The woods are forbidden. The woods are forbidden, he said. And the girl paused just for a moment. Ready for a badass line? Here's a badass line. And the girl paused just for a moment. I'm the reason they are forbidden. Ooh. I'm the reason they're forbidden. And the girl paused just for a moment. I'm the reason they're forbidden, she said. And hurried south. Herbert stood, Herbert stood in his pole boat, silver heavy in his hand, dread coiling in his gut. Herbert stood in his pole boat, silver heavy in his hand, dread coiling in his gut. He could hear Templemen. He could hear Templemen hollering behind him. He could hear Templemen hollering in the distance. He was really quite certain he'd never seen the girl blink. All right, I think that's a decent enough start. So we've got this man who's in, a state of familiarity. He's got flaws that we can have later sort of addressed. Like, I think he's fundamentally self-interested and greedy. And this society is sort of run by these templemen, by these church people who, seem a bit sort of antagonistic, but maybe they've actually got some kind of reasoning for what they do. We've got a bit of a sort of class thing going on. There's sort of this distinction between the haves and the have-nots, which might develop some more. I think I can't escape this feeling that it feels just very sort of generic sort of fantasy worldy sort of thing. It needs a bit more flavor. I like the Templemen and their turtle shells. I think that's good. But we'll get to that. Rego suggests in the chat that that Herbert should think about the Forbidden Woods earlier. Yeah, I totally agree. I think in this description of the dawn and the town would be a good opportunity to sort of mention, sort of the dark woods over on the other side of the river. That would make sense. All right, so let's do a final read through of the story and then we'll wrap this up. Oh, we need a title. Well, all right. Styx. Styx is a pretty cool title. I like that. It's a little bit edgy, but I think that's cool. So Styx. All right. Herbert Paddleman surveyed the docks. The trick was to judge prospective Herbert Paddleman surveyed the docks. The trick was to judge prospective customers for how much they'd pay. A sun-weary peasant could only afford a small fare, but a fat, wealthy merchant might pay thrice the price. With luck, Herbert could earn enough to get home before the sun went down. It was the second day of the Feast of St. Agnes. Actually, we should tie the feast in to, what's going on. Like maybe, the dead have risen partly that's got something to do with this feast, like maybe this holy feast, maybe there's some kind of secret ritual that someone did during the holy feast that caused the dead to rise or something. Or maybe the purpose of the feast is to distract everyone from, whatever the templemen do to sort of run things or whatever. That could be interesting. But it was the second day of the Feast of St. Agnes, and the sun rose unsteadily, as though it too had partaken in the revelry last night. The first night of the feast was always a memorable affair. for those who did not over-imbibe. Many would be sleeping in late, but many more had work to do. Herbert saw farmers transporting heaps of produce to the market, great piles of radishes, cabbages, and double-ended carrots weighing down their river barges so that the water kissed the top of the boat. The purple dawn painted the terracotta rooftops of the town and danced atop the river. The chimneys of the bakeries and blacksmiths were already gently smoking. Temple bells rang for the morning prayer, for those who would hear it. And far across the river to the south, the forests loomed, yet untouched by the dawn. Alright, that's fine. Herbert saw a likely customer, an older gentleman in fine velvets, walking with an unsteady gait towards the river. Herbert took up his pole to intercept the man when a voice startled him. "How much for passage, ferryman?" Herbert turned and saw an urchin girl, a tangle of black locks spilled from beneath a frayed shawl. Maybe it should be grey hair to sort of emphasize that there's something weird about this girl, like she's young but she has grey hair. A tangle of grey locks spilled from beneath a frayed shawl. Herbert was about to tell her she couldn't afford passage when the girl produced a handful of silver. "Where'd you get that?" Herbert asked doubtfully. "You want it or not?" the girl asked, and threw a glance over her shoulder. The girl was obviously trouble, and Herbert didn't want to make that trouble his own. His grandma always told him to let trouble lie. But that's silver. That was a week's fare, at least. And the girl didn't know how much he had. He'd be a fool not to take it. "You want to get to West Bank?" Herbert asked. "Yes," she said. "Now or not at all." Let's say that she urges that. Urged. Because she's, urgent. Her eyes flashed steely. "I could find another ferryman." "I'll take you," Herbert said, and pushed his boat by the dock, quickly. He didn't want to be seen with the girl any more than the girl wanted to be seen. Herbert glimpsed a couple of temple guards moving purposefully across the docks. He heard their turtle-shell necklaces rattling. Their dark robes flowed like shadows. The girl stepped carefully onto the boat, unsteady. Perhaps she hadn't been in one before. Herbert thought he'd seen every sort of person who came through this town, but he couldn't place this girl. Her clothes seemed thin and ragged. He swore he could see cobwebs hanging off her tunic. Dock and headed west, hoping the temple guards weren't following. Herbert had crossed this river so many times that poling across was automatic. Sometimes, to keep himself entertained, he would guess how many pushes it would take to pole his boat to shore. Carrying several heavy people might take 200 pushes. This skinny girl should only take 120. He did the math in his head to distract himself from the trouble he might be getting himself in. He glanced back at his passenger, and she didn't seem interested in conversation. She just stared out. She just stared out intently at the western bank as though it might disappear if she blinked. In fact, Herbert was quite sure he hadn't seen her blink at all. Best not to think about it. Soon enough, he'd reached the far bank. 110 pushes. He wasn't far off. The girl hopped off the boat before it had even stopped, and almost fell into the silty mud under the pier. This side of the river had only a few small boat sheds and sparse, gnarled trees either side of the western road. Beyond lay the farmlands, where 1,000 tiny homesteads worked their fields. But the girl looked southwest to the woods, where ancient fir trees stood in misty groves. The temple men forbade entry to these woods, except for their own chosen, at their own chosen times. Herbert supposed he should warn this foreign girl of the prohibition, but first he needed his silver. She handed his payment without second thought, and Herbert felt the weight of silver with satisfaction. She turned to leave, not by the west road, but towards the southern forest. Herbert hesitated. "The woods are forbidden," he said, and the girl paused, just for a moment. "I'm the reason they're forbidden," she said, and hurried south. Herbert stood in his pole boat, silver heavy in his hand, dread coiling in his gut. He could hear Templemen hollering in the distance. He was really quite certain he'd never seen the girl blink. All right, I think that's cool. We promised that this would be a bad episode, and I feel like we kind of delivered. I feel like our other stories have been a bit more flavorful than this one. But this is another one to add to the pile, and maybe one day we'll actually finish one of them. We have done several episodes on the exciting cosmic space ventures of Jackson Space Boots, and I think that's something we'll return to again. I also have a fondness for gas troll. I feel as though that might go somewhere as well. And mito fusion. Look, they were all kind of fun. They're all kind of fun. So thank you so much for listening and participating with this episode of Marten Cordial. Thank you, Rege, Akonig, Kadas, Adva, 70. We also had Fabian. Thanks to everyone who joined in, and we'll do another episode of Marten Cordial sometime. So cheers, have a good one, do your thing, and we'll be back another time. Cheers.